The day I finally said, no. Namaste, everyone. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked away from a situation and later thought, I should have said something? Maybe someone was treated unfairly. Maybe someone was insulted. Maybe someone needed help. And even though your heart wanted to act, your feet kept moving. This story is about that moment. Not about a soldier, not about a superhero, but about an ordinary man who spent most of his life avoiding conflict. His name was Arun. Arun worked as an accounts assistant in a small company. He was the kind of person people called nice. He never argued, never raised his voice, and never created problems. If a colleague pushed extra work onto him, he accepted it. If a shopkeeper gave less change, he ignored it. If someone spoke rudely, he smiled and moved on. People liked him because he was easy to deal with. But deep inside, Arun knew the truth. He wasn't peaceful. He was afraid. Afraid of confrontation. Afraid of anger. Afraid of being judged. When he was in school, he had seen a classmate being bullied. He wanted to help, but he stayed silent. In college, a teacher blamed him for a mistake he hadn't made. He accepted it quietly. At work, he watched his senior humiliate a new employee in front of everyone. Again, he said nothing. Every time he stayed silent, he told himself the same thing: why get involved? Let someone else handle it. One rainy evening, Arun was returning home after a long day at work. The sky was dark, the roads were wet, and the bus was crowded. People stood shoulder to shoulder, holding bags, umbrellas, and tired expressions. Arun found a place near the middle of the bus and looked out the window. He was already thinking about dinner, sleep, and another ordinary day tomorrow. At the next stop, an elderly fruit seller climbed aboard carrying 2 baskets. His clothes were soaked from the rain. He carefully placed the baskets near the door and apologized to everyone as he squeezed inside. Sorry, Beta. Just a little space, he said softly. Most people ignored him. Arun gave him a small smile. The bus moved again. 10 minutes later, 3 young men boarded. They were loud, restless, and smelled of alcohol. One of them kicked the fruit basket by accident. Apples rolled across the floor. The old man bent down quickly. Please be careful, son. These are for tomorrow's market. The young man laughed. Then hold them properly. Another one picked up an apple, tossed it in the air, and said, How much for this? 20 rupees, the old man replied. 20, the young man said loudly. For this tiny thing. He took a bite and threw the apple back into the basket. People looked away. Arun felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something. But his mind immediately began its usual conversation. Don't get involved. There are 3 of them. What if they fight with you? Someone else will speak. No one spoke. The 3rd young man pushed the basket again. More fruit fell. The old seller's hands trembled as he tried to gather everything. Please, sons, he said, this is my livelihood. One of the men grabbed his collar. Then pay us for the trouble of carrying your baskets in our bus. The bus became silent. Arun looked around. A college student stared at his phone. A businessman pretended to sleep. Two passengers moved farther away. Even the conductor looked uncertain. Arun's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. He remembered another face, his father. His father had died 3 years earlier. A simple school teacher. Not wealthy. Not powerful. But whenever Arun came home upset, his father used to say one sentence: "Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing the right thing even while you are afraid." Arun had heard that sentence hundreds of times. But he had never truly understood it. Until now. His legs felt weak. His mouth felt dry. Every instinct told him to stay quiet. Yet another thought appeared. If this were my father standing there, would I still look away? That question changed everything. Slowly, Arun stood up. The young men were still arguing with the fruit seller when they heard a voice behind them. "Please leave him alone." The bus turned toward Arun. Even he was surprised by how shaky his voice sounded. One of the men laughed. "What did you say?" Arun swallowed hard. "I said, please leave him alone. He hasn't done anything." The tallest man walked toward him. "And who are you?" Arun wanted to sit down again. He wanted to disappear. But somehow he remained standing. "Just a passenger," he said. "Like everyone else." The man stepped closer. "Then behave like a passenger and stay quiet." For a moment Arun thought he would back down. His hands were trembling. His knees were shaking. Fear was still there. But something else had finally appeared beside the fear. Decision. Arun took a breath and said, "No." The entire bus froze. And that was the moment his life changed. For a few seconds, complete silence filled the bus. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed to disappear. Arun could hear nothing except the beating of his own heart. His hands were trembling, his throat was dry, and every part of him wanted to sit back down and pretend nothing had happened. But he remained standing. The tallest of the three young men walked closer, until he was only a few inches away. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a friendly person. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed making others afraid. "So," the young man said, "you've decided to become a hero today." Arun looked into his eyes and quietly replied, "No. I just don't think what you're doing is right." The young man laughed loudly. His two friends joined him. One of them clapped sarcastically and said, "Listen to him. He's teaching us right and wrong." The passengers remained silent. Some looked out of the window. Others lowered their heads. Everyone could see what was happening, but nobody wanted to become part of it. The elderly fruit seller quickly stepped forward. "Please, son," he said to Arun. "Don't argue because of me. Let it go." Arun turned toward the old man. "It isn't only about you," he replied softly. "It's about what's right." The words surprised even Arun himself. He had never spoken like that before. The tallest young man suddenly pushed Arun on the shoulder. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough to send a message. "You should learn to mind your own business," he said. Arun stumbled backward, but managed to keep his balance. Fear rushed through his body again. His mind whispered the same old sentence. "Sit down. Apologize. Walk away." But another voice inside him spoke louder than ever before. If you sit today, you'll spend the rest of your life remembering that you stood up only to give up. Before Arun could respond, something unexpected happened. A voice came from the back of the bus. He's right. Everyone turned. It was the construction worker, who had been sitting quietly since the beginning of the journey. He slowly stood up. His clothes were covered with cement dust, and his hands showed years of hard work. He walked forward calmly. "I'm just a laborer," he said, "but I know the difference between strength and bullying." The three young men looked at him. "Oh, another hero has arrived," one of them laughed. The construction worker smiled. "No," he replied. "Heroes wear uniforms. I'm just someone who is tired of watching good people stay silent." For the first time, the three young men looked slightly uncomfortable. The conductor, who had been standing near the front door, finally gathered the courage to speak. "Enough," he said firmly. "There will be no fighting on this bus." One of the young men pointed a finger toward him. "You stay out of this." The conductor hesitated for a moment. Then he looked at Arun. Then at the construction worker. Finally he took a deep breath. "No," he said. "This is my bus while you're on it." Another unexpected thing happened. The college student, who had spent the entire journey looking at his phone, quietly stood up. He removed his earphones and said, "He's right." A middle-aged woman carrying groceries also stood. "So are they." Then the businessman, who had pretended to sleep, opened his eyes and stepped into the aisle. One by one, people who had been silent only a minute earlier began standing. Nobody shouted. Nobody threatened anyone. They simply stood together. The atmosphere inside the bus changed completely. Just moments earlier, Arun had felt completely alone. Now he realized he wasn't. The tallest young man looked around. He counted the faces. 1, 2, 5, 10. Almost the entire bus was standing. He looked back at Arun and forced a smile. "This isn't over," he muttered. The construction worker calmly replied, "It can be. Just apologize." For a few seconds nobody moved. Then something happened that nobody expected. The little boy sitting beside his mother tugged at her hand and asked loudly, "Mom, why are those uncles angry?" His innocent voice broke the tension. His mother gently replied, "Because sometimes people forget how to behave." The boy looked at the three young men and innocently said, "My teacher says strong people protect others." No one spoke. The words of a child carried more weight than any argument. The tallest young man looked around again. For the first time, he lowered his eyes. Without saying another word, he released the old fruit seller's collar. His friends quietly stepped back. As the bus slowed near the next stop, the three young men climbed off. Before leaving, the tallest one looked back at Arun. But this time there was no smile. Only silence. The bus doors closed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the driver smiled into the mirror and said, "Now we can continue the journey." The entire bus burst into gentle applause. Arun immediately felt embarrassed. He waved his hands and said, "Please. I didn't do anything special." The construction worker laughed. "You did the hardest thing." "What?" Arun asked. "You stood up first." The elderly fruit seller slowly walked toward Arun carrying a small paper bag. Inside were 2 fresh apples. He held them out and said, "Please take these." Arun smiled. "No, Baba. They are yours." The old man shook his head. "Today they are yours. You protected more than my fruit. You protected my dignity." Arun accepted the apples with tears in his eyes. He remembered his father again. For years he had believed courage meant feeling fearless. Today he finally understood the truth. Courage was feeling afraid and choosing to do the right thing anyway. As the bus continued through the rain, the passengers, who had been strangers an hour earlier, were now talking, laughing, and sharing snacks with one another. It felt as though the journey itself had changed, or perhaps the people had. The rest of the journey passed in a way that none of us had expected. Just an hour earlier, everyone on that bus had been complete strangers. People were sitting quietly, avoiding eye contact, looking at their phones, or simply waiting for the journey to end. But after what had happened, something had changed. The walls between strangers had disappeared. Conversations began. People smiled at one another. Someone opened a packet of biscuits and offered it to everyone nearby. The middle-aged woman shared homemade snacks with the little boy sitting across the aisle. Even the conductor, who had looked worried throughout the incident, finally relaxed and started joking with the passengers. It no longer felt like a bus full of strangers. It felt like a family that had gone through something together. Arun quietly returned to his seat. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but his heart was still beating faster than usual. He looked out of the rain-covered window and replayed everything in his mind. He couldn't believe he had actually stood up. A few minutes earlier, he had been ready to stay silent like he always had. If someone had told him that morning that he would confront 3 bullies before the day ended, he would have laughed. The elderly fruit seller slowly walked over and sat beside Arun for a few minutes. He smiled gently and said, "Son, may I ask you something?" "Of course," Arun replied. "Were you afraid?" Arun smiled honestly. "I was terrified." The old man nodded. "I could see that." Arun looked surprised. "You knew?" The old man laughed softly. "Fear can be seen in the eyes. Courage cannot." Arun looked confused. The old man continued. "People think brave people don't feel fear. That isn't true. The bravest people often feel the most fear. The only difference is that they don't allow fear to make their decisions." Those words settled deeply into Arun's heart. A little later, the construction worker walked over carrying 2 cups of tea that he had bought during a short stop. He handed 1 cup to Arun. "For our first victory together," he said with a smile. Arun laughed. "It wasn't my victory." The worker shook his head. "It wasn't yours. It wasn't mine. It belonged to everyone who finally stood up." After a few moments of silence, Arun asked, "Can I ask you something?" The worker nodded. "You stood up without hesitation. Have you always been this brave?" The worker smiled and looked out of the window. "No." "Then what changed?" He took a sip of tea before answering. 5 years ago, I saw a man being beaten near a railway station. Arun listened carefully. "I wanted to help. But I stayed where I was. I told myself someone else would step in. No one did." The worker lowered his eyes. That man died before the ambulance arrived. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. I still remember his face, the worker said quietly. I promised myself that day I would never again allow fear to decide who I wanted to be. Arun realized that courage is often born from regret. As the bus finally entered the city, passengers slowly collected their bags. The little boy ran toward Arun before getting off. He smiled and said, "Uncle, you are my hero." Arun laughed and gently placed his hand on the boy's head. No. Be the hero in your own story. The little boy smiled and waved goodbye. The elderly fruit seller also prepared to leave. Before stepping off the bus, he held Arun's hand and said something Arun would remember for the rest of his life. Son, today you didn't just save my fruit. You saved my faith in people. Then he disappeared into the crowd. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Arun continued working in the same office. He still traveled by bus. He still earned the same salary. Nothing outside had changed dramatically. But something inside him had changed forever. He began speaking up whenever someone was treated unfairly. He encouraged new employees instead of watching them struggle alone. He politely questioned wrong decisions instead of remaining silent. Sometimes people agreed with him. Sometimes they didn't. But one thing never happened again. He never walked away simply because he was afraid. One afternoon, almost 6 months later, Arun was walking through the same market where he had first boarded that bus. Suddenly he heard someone calling his name. Arun. He turned around. Standing in front of him was the elderly fruit seller. This time his small shop looked much better. Fresh fruits were neatly arranged. Customers surrounded the stall. The old man smiled warmly. I've been hoping to meet you again. He invited Arun to sit down. As they talked, the old man said, "Do you know what happened after that day?" Arun shook his head. The old man smiled. The people on that bus started visiting my shop. Some came to buy fruit. Some simply came to ask how I was. One passenger even helped me get a license for this shop. Arun looked around. The little roadside baskets had become a proper fruit stall. The old man continued. One act of courage changed more lives than you can imagine. Arun smiled. I only spoke a few words. The old man gently replied, never underestimate a few honest words. They can become the beginning of someone else's hope. That evening, while walking home, Arun passed a school. Children were playing in the playground. One boy fell while running. Before the teacher reached him, 3 classmates immediately ran over and helped him stand. Arun smiled. He suddenly realized something. Courage spreads. Just like fear spreads. One brave decision gives another person permission to be brave. One kind act inspires another. One voice encourages many others to speak. That night Arun opened an old diary that had belonged to his father. Inside the first page was a sentence written in neat handwriting. The world changes one brave decision at a time. Arun closed the diary and smiled. For years he had thought courage meant doing something extraordinary. Now he understood the truth. Real courage is found in ordinary moments. It is choosing honesty when lying is easier. It is defending someone who cannot defend themselves. It is apologizing when your ego says no. It is admitting your mistakes. It is standing alone if standing alone is the right thing to do. Most importantly, it is refusing to let fear decide the kind of person you become. And perhaps that is the lesson I want to leave with you today. Every one of us will face moments when life quietly asks a question. Will you stay silent? Or will you speak? Will you walk away? Or will you stand? You may not feel ready. You may be afraid. Your voice may even tremble. But remember this: courage does not begin when fear disappears. Courage begins the moment you decide that doing the right thing is more important than feeling comfortable. Before I end today's story, I want to sincerely thank each one of you for spending your valuable time with me. In a world where everyone is busy, your time is one of the greatest gifts you can give, and I truly appreciate that you chose to spend these moments listening to this story. I hope Arun's journey reminds us that heroes are not born with special powers. They are ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when life gives them the opportunity. If this story touched your heart or made you think about someone who inspires courage, carry that feeling with you and share it with others. I look forward to meeting you again with another meaningful story that we can experience together. Until then, stay kind, stay humble, and whenever life gives you a chance to do the right thing, have the courage to say, "No, this is not right." Thank you, and I'll see you in the next story.